as some of you know, for 2 weeks, my back has been out. And besides staring at the ceiling, the only thing I've been able to do is watch movies. And since it's the Halloween season, that means I've rewatched all the classic Universal monster movies. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, all of them. I've worked myself up into a monster frenzy, but now that my back is getting so much better, I don't just want to see them on a flat screen, I want to see monsters in person. And the best place to do that is Hollywood! Oh yes, that's right, we're back in Hollywood, where people do stuff and there are some things and a big sign there, and some other stuff and some things. Yes, that's right, Hollywood. What better place to look for the monsters than the town where not only were the monsters born, but where every day is Halloween. Look at this, we got Darth Vader, Spider-Man, Catwoman, and Snow White. Look at this, we got sketchy SpongeBob out here. Nice to see him getting all dressed up and in the Halloween spirit. Alright, well, as you may have guessed, these weren't the monsters we actually came here to see. The reason we're up here on Hollywood Boulevard, one of my least favorite places on earth, is to head inside Madame Tussauds Hollywood Wax Museum. Not for the beautiful celebrities you see before you here, but for something epic I haven't had a chance to check out yet. Something I have been dying to see. Madame Tussauds Illusions of Horror exhibit. Look, there he is! Dracula himself. Bela Lugosi. I saw this guy at Midsummer Scream, and I was so impressed with how perfectly lifelike he is. Oh my gosh, he looks like he could just come to life and suck your blood. Well, if it weren't for that giant cross and all that garlic on the wall. Dude, look at that Hungarian vampire. He's so handsome, yet so horrifying. He's mesmerizing me with his gaze. Dude, this is awesome. After Midsummer Scream, Madame Tussauds actually saw my footage and invited me to come here for the opening of this exhibit. Unfortunately, I was out of town, so we've just come as regular ticket holders today. But I don't mind paying, if only to see this. It's Boris Karloff as the Mummy. Everyone knows Boris Karloff as Frankenstein, one of my favorite movies of all time. But I find that people tend to forget he was also the very first mummy, Imhotep, in 1932. The amazing makeup job by Jack Pierce when he's in the bandages in the tomb is only seen on screen for just a few seconds of the movie, but it's one of the most epic and horrifying things, at least in my opinion, in the whole film. Oh my gosh, this is so awesome. Boris Karloff in half a sarcophagus. You can take a fun pic in the other one, and look down here. Flesh-eating beetles are crawling out. Oh my gosh, the details on this are so amazing. This is unbelievable. How do I get one of these at home? This is awesome. Dude, this is so freaking cool. Dracula, The Mummy. I love those classic 1930s Universal monster movies. But there's also so much more. Look at this poltergeist. You want a balloon, Georgie? You want a balloon? Oh yes, they float. We all float down here. This is awesome. It's weird because I never used to be big on horror movies. I mean, I can watch Poltergeist, The Shining. I mean, don't get me wrong. Every once in a while, I would dig in and enjoy a good scare. And I love the classics, The Shining, Silence of the Lambs. But I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a horror super fan until I found those classic monster movies. Those got me hooked. Ooh, look at Anthony Hopkins here. Hello, Clarice. Now, Allie here, on the other hand, she loves horror movies. All horror movies. The scarier, the better. She loves modern stuff like The Conjuring and Us and all those kind of movies. But The Shining's still your favorite, right? How old were you when you first saw that?
I think like 7 or 8.
Yeah, what the heck? Who watches The Shining when they're 7 years old?
Me and him.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, it's just a small room in here, not very large. And unfortunately, and highly irritatingly, the Boris Karloff as Frankenstein figure is gone.
They said he's being retouched right now.
Why? Oh, well, I'm just happy to be out of bed, and after watching all those classic movies, I gotta say, it's pretty awesome to see these figures in real life and get a sense of how tall they were and how I stack up to Dracula. And Boris Karloff as the Mummy. I mean, I honestly would have come here just for this. And even though I'm a little disappointed that Frankenstein's monster is absent, I'm not too stressed out about it, because although seeing these wax figures here is really cool, there's another place in LA with an exhibit about Universal classic monsters that actually has props used in the movies themselves, and where we can see Dracula in his other form, the vampiric bat. But to see it, we're gonna have to ski-daddle out of Madame Tussauds, past Danny Zuko and Forrest Gump, past the Starfleet captains, pausing only to get a quick haircut over here from Edward Scissorhands himself. Johnny Depp? I guess technically Edward Scissorhands isn't a horror movie, but I kind of feel like they should have stuck him in the other room too. As much as I love Jack Nicholson and Steven Spielberg and Bruce Willis and E.T. and French Fry Lady, I am really excited to get to our next destination. So it's peace out, Snoop Doggy Dog. Goodbye, Obama. As we go from Hollywood Wax Museum to an actual museum, the Los Angeles County Natural History Museum, which at the moment is having a special exhibit called The Natural History of Horror. At first, I must admit, it does seem kind of weird that there's a classic horror movie exhibit in a natural history museum. But this museum actually owns several artifacts from the old Universal Monsters days. Things that are normally not available to be seen by the public. But I guess for Halloween this year, they found an excuse. Yes. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. Look at this. I'm so excited. Wow. Right from the beginning, they've got a life-size model of the creature from the Black Lagoon. I never knew this, but apparently the creature from the Black Lagoon was partly inspired by an actual living fossil discovered in the 1930s. Now, I believe this full-size creature here is just a replica, but over to the side, if I'm reading this sign correctly, it's something amazing. An original 1954 creature from the Black Lagoon mask. Now, this particular one wasn't seen in the movie. It's just a pull from the original mold from back in the day. So it's technically not screen used, but we are in fact looking at the actual original creature from the Black Lagoon, designed by Millicent Patrick and sculpted by Chris Miller. It is incredible to see all this detail, and man, for polyurethane, this has held up well since 1954. I mean, that is unbelievable. Old fish face looks pretty darn amazing. I mean, you can see where it's aged a little bit over time, but that is unbelievable that this still exists. Dude, I love the creature, but I'm even more excited for the other stuff they have in this room. As you can see, it's not very large, but it's not the size of the room that counts, it's what's in it. First of all, they're showing scenes from those classic movies, beginning with Bela Lugosi as Dracula. And as promised, just like I said, in this humble display case is one of the coolest things I have ever seen. The actual prop bat from Dracula. This is incredible. Bela Lugosi may be dead and gone, but Count Dracula still lives. It is amazing to realize that this is the actual Dracula bat from the 1931 film. I had always assumed it was made out of rubber, but it turns out the wings are made of cloth to look more realistic back then. And the top of him is covered with real fur. Dude, I never noticed the little face on this bat before. I mean, to be fair, in 1931, they weren't exactly filming these movies in high def, but this adds a whole new dimension to it, seeing this in person, because you can see that the bat actually has a sort of human-looking face. That is incredible, and incredible that it survived this long intact with those flimsy cloth wings. I mean, think about it, Allie. You're looking at Count Dracula from the movie. Insane. See, I kind of see what they've done here now. They've tied in some of the movie props with the things from natural history that inspired them, like actual bats, and talking about how rabies may have inspired stories of vampires, how prehistoric fish may have inspired the creature from the Black Lagoon. And what's really interesting and cool is the interactive stuff over here, where you can learn about how some of those original old school sound effects were made by making them yourself. You can make the rain sounds, or the wagon noises, even the thunder. Listen to that. Oh. Dracula was one of the first horror movies to have sound. And they took full advantage of that fact, filming an English and Spanish version at the same time on the same set, with different actors, of course. That is pretty darn cool. I still can't get over the Count Dracula himself. It's just sitting in that display case. Awesome, but it doesn't stop there, because they also have an exhibit about one of my favorite movies of all time, 1932's The Mummy, the original Boris Karloff mummy. Last year, I went out and actually hunted down the 1932 filming locations out in the desert, because for some reason I just became obsessed with that movie. It's kind of more of an eternal love story or eternal tragedy than it really is a horror movie. Well, at least to us today. But you gotta remember, back in the 1920s and 30s, after King Tut's tomb was discovered and rumors were flying around about the Pharaoh's curse, this was pretty scary, topical stuff. This is amazing. In this display case, right next to actual ancient Egyptian artifacts, are two pieces from the 1932 film. First is this prop face that they used in the movie, actually seen on screen when they're panning across the museum. I know it's really just a background piece, but apparently it was inspired pretty much directly by a vase that was actually found in King Tut's tomb. Just the idea that that was on set when Boris Karloff was all wrapped up as the mummy is freaking incredible. This was actually made for the movie. It looks really simple, like it's just made out of wood. Unbelievable to think how well this background prop here held up over the years. And honestly, to someone like me who's obsessed with the movie, it is epic to see this thing with my own eyes, but even more impressive is this. Apparently that little roll right there is leftover wrappings from the mummy. Those are Boris Karloff's bandages. Of course, there's no way to know for sure whether or not these particular ones were actually used or just spares. The sign doesn't make it particularly clear. These bandages are actually left over from the production, and I gotta say, they're startlingly similar to these real, actual ancient Egyptian bandages used for the same purpose. I mean, look at that. That's amazing. They're almost exactly the same width across, a very similar texture. Boris Karloff actually had to wear 150 feet of those bandages for the movie, not to mention being covered with clay and dirt, and the bandages being soaked in weird chemicals and covered by layers of makeup that took over 8 hours to put on. All, like I said earlier, for just a few seconds of screen time. And they never really showed the full mummy in motion with all the makeup. Like we saw earlier at Madame Tussauds, we actually had a better view there because they felt, and I think they were right, that not seeing the full mummy, but then seeing Bramwell Fletcher's reaction when he goes insane would be even scarier than showing the whole monster right from the beginning.
He went for a little walk.
Imagine going through 8 hours of applying makeup and chemical-soaked bandages, all to be seen on screen for just a few seconds. Well, or a few minutes if you count the time he spent sitting there in the background. That is some commitment. Anyway, when we next see the mummy coming through the desert, he's become partially regenerated and is in disguise as the evil Ardeth Bay. Which, by the way, was another fantastic and excruciating makeup job done by the legendary Jack Pierce, who pretty much single-handedly created the look of the mummy, the Wolfman, and of course, best of all, Frankenstein's monster. Dude, the 1930s Frankenstein movies are some of my favorite films of all time. And that's where Boris Karloff, playing the monster, of course, got his big break. That's that unforgettable Jack Pierce makeup job. The actual novel almost barely describes the monster, so Jack Pierce had to pretty much make that up from scratch. Man, I really wish they had had that figure out at Madame Tussauds. Wow, look at all this laboratory equipment. They have a little experiment here where you can drive electricity through a frog's leg and see it twitching after death. I mean, that's not an actual frog's leg. But it recreates early experiments by Luigi Galvani, who in the 1700s shocked everybody by making animal limbs move with the power of electricity, and then later his nephew caused an actual human corpse to move by running electricity through the body. I told you this was shocking stuff. What's really awesome about this little Frankenstein exhibit over here is you can pull that lever there, causing electricity to flow through all this laboratory equipment here and revealing Frankenstein's monster. Dude, that is awesome. By the way, one of the things that really bugs me about Frankenstein is how if you call the monster Frankenstein, everybody gets upset and goes, oh, it's Frankenstein's monster. The doctor's name was Frankenstein. Well, Frankenstein was the mad scientist's last name, and as his creation, the monster would have the same last name as well. Not to mention in the sequel where they create a bride for the monster, Dr. Pretorius literally says in the movie, the bride of Frankenstein. And it wasn't a bride for the Baron, it was a mate for the monster. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that it's in canon legit to call the actual monster himself Frankenstein. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Allie.
Why? I agree with you.
Anyway, this display with the history of the experiments is pretty cool, but it's nothing compared to what's in here. The actual shackles of the monster himself when he was being tortured by Dwight Fry playing Fritz. This is an epic piece of cinema history, world cinema history. Dracula started it and was popular, but Frankenstein was a sensation. That was the game changer that set the world on fire. It is unbelievable to think that Boris Karloff, as the monster, had his wrists in these shackles. These were in Frankenstein's castle. I can't believe that I'm actually seeing this with my own eyes. I can stare at this stuff all day. This is amazing. If you look really close, you can see the ball here was just made out of wood and painted. The actual chains seem to be made out of real metal. And looking closely at the shackles, they appear to be made out of real metal too. That is flippin' amazing. It's funny because the torture scenes where Fritz is putting the pointed torch in the monster's face were actually considered extremely graphic and violent for 1931 standards. That was one of the many parts of the movie that was either shortened or censored completely, including Frankenstein saying now he knows what it feels like to be God, and the scene where little Maria gets thrown into the lake and drowns. This was heavy, racy stuff for the time. It's funny though, because as horrifying as some people in the audience found the monster, he's really a sympathetic creature. I mean, kids always understand that it's actually a sad story. The monster is a sad and tragic figure, which is exactly how Boris Karloff played him, and in fact, he would refer to him as the creature. So again, another early Universal horror movie that was actually a tragedy. I can't believe I am actually standing here next to screen-used props from Frankenstein, the Boris Karloff mummy, even Dracula as a bat himself. This is an unbelievable epic thrill for me, believe me. This whole natural history of horror exhibit is amazing. I am so glad that we caught this. It may be kind of small, but the stuff in here is so mind-blowingly epic. Not to mention the way they have all these cool interactive things. I've seen both the kids and the parents enjoying teaching you the science stories and techniques that were used to inspire and create these movies. It also doesn't hurt that there's a giant double-sided screen in the middle of the room showing clips from the films to remind you of just how epic they actually were. One thing that's really weird about this exhibit that I was expecting to find and wasn't here are some artifacts and equipment that were owned by Lon Chaney, the original Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame. Two movies that not only paved the way for Dracula and Frankenstein, but also Lon Chaney Sr. was the father of Lon Chaney Jr., who followed in his father's footsteps, becoming the Wolfman and then the Mummy, and eventually even played Frankenstein's monster. I'm pretty sure the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles actually owns Lon Chaney Sr.'s makeup kit and one of his life masks. Just surprised they didn't find a way to include it. Oh well, I hope someday I'm able to lay my eyes on that stuff too. You can ask Allie. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that at times I become obsessed with these movies, particularly the Frankenstein films, both for Boris Karloff's monster and of course Colin Clive, Dr. Frankenstein himself, who is not only one of my absolute favorite characters, but probably the single most underrated character in the original Frankenstein movie. Anyway, the point is I could talk about these films all day long, so I'd probably better stop here before I get too carried away and just keep on telling you facts you don't really need to know. Like how Dracula never says, that comes from the Count on Sesame Street. Or how the role of the monster played by Boris Karloff launched him to stardom, but was originally offered to and rejected by Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, because he thought a character with no lines wouldn't get him anywhere. You see what I'm saying? I just want to keep talking about it. I guess we'll have to do it on the little podcast we have for the Patreon people. Anyway, even though my back is still hurting quite a bit, it was still well worth getting out of the house to see this stuff. If you have never seen the classic Universal Monsters movies, I highly, highly, highly recommend them. Especially the 3 Frankenstein movies with Boris Karloff as the monster, the original Mummy movie where Boris Karloff is the mummy, and then of course Dracula. Just keep in mind that Dracula was adapted from a play, so it's a little bit slower than modern audiences are used to. But if it feels a little too slow for you, there's always the creature from the Black Lagoon, which was released in the 1950s, so a much more recent movie. I feel like that's why it's a lot of younger people's favorite Universal monster. Anyway, if you're anywhere near or in Los Angeles between now and April 2020, I highly, highly, highly recommend taking in this exhibit. Plus, let's not forget there are dinosaurs in here, and the halls with all the various stuffed animals, which by the way was a Mad Men filming location. They have lions and tigers and bears and Hakuna Matata and whatnot. It's a pretty cool place to visit. As a matter of fact, I really need to put this on my to-do list, coming back when there's more time to get a more extensive view of the museum, because I gotta tell you, between you and me, this place rocks. Alright gang, well now unfortunately the museum is closing up for the day. I'm pretty darn stoked that we actually managed to make it up here in time. I didn't know at first that this closes at 5 o'clock. I probably should have gone to Madame Tussauds afterwards. That stays open a lot later. Anyway, all that's left to do now is to exit through the gift shop. Oh, look at this. They've got bookmarks with the little film cells on them. Sold. Hey, you got to take a picture with Billy Zane. I'm getting a mummy bookmark. All right, gang. Well, even after all of this, the most horrifying thing about today is the lingering back pain. So since the museum is closed, I think it's best to head home and get back to watching those movies. And since we've now done our duty,
We can go home and
sleep well.
inconsistency here. They have the Universal Creature poster, they've got the original Dracula poster, but unfortunately they've made an error. This mummy poster here is not from the 1932 Boris Karloff mummy. This is from the Peter Cushing Christopher Lee Hammer horror version of the mummy, where Christopher Lee was wrapped in bandages and played Cloris the mummy, not Imhotep the mummy like Boris Karloff. Oh, they made a mistake. What are they doing? I love this movie too. I'm buying it anyway.
Well, gee, we can't let that old Potter take over Bedford Falls. He's a monster, I tell you. A monster. Oh, never mind. I guess that's a monster.
Look, guys, it's Billy Zane. How insane is that? Billy Zane. Allie got some pictures with Billy Zane. I told him I always loved The Phantom. Very underrated movie, The Phantom. Do you feel different now?
A little bit.
You met Billy Zane, you touched him. He was in the Titanic. He survived the Titanic. What did you guys think of the Natural History of Horror exhibit? Did you think it was cool? I thought it was freaking awesome. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought, but also, let me know if you know of any other places where crazy Universal or classic Hammer horror monster stuff is on display. I would love to check it out. This thing blew my mind. I can't wait to see if there's more out there.